This is London Real. I am Brian Rose. My guest today is David Icke, the English writer, broadcaster, and public speaker known since the 1990s as a professional conspiracy researcher, calling yourself a full-time investigator into who and what is really controlling the world. You are the author of 21 books and have lectured in over 25 countries, speaking live for up to 10 hours to huge audiences, filling stadiums like Wembley Arena. You are here for the fourth time this year to talk about the implications of the COVID-19 pandemic and global lockdown, the looming economic recession, dangerous technology rollouts, including 5G, mandatory vaccinations, the protests, riots, and destruction of property, Black Lives Matter and their unidentified fundraisers and ulterior motives, the concept of defunding the police, and the continuous censorship and violation of our basic human right to freedom of speech. David, welcome back to London Real.
Thank you, Brian.
It's great to have you here. First, I just want to announce that we are live streaming now on our new Digital Freedom platform, which is a censorship-free, independent broadcasting system that is of the people, by the people, for the people, and available exclusively at our website at freedomplatform.tv. Can everyone watching us now please share this link via the sidebar to any and all of your social media channels? Let me repeat that. Can everyone watching now please share this link via the sidebar to any and all of your social media channels? This is important. Simply ask your friends and family to give us 15 minutes. That's all we ask, and then they can decide. For our last conversation, Rose Icke 3, nearly 70% of our viewers came from people sharing this episode link. So if everybody could share this now to all of our platforms and contacts, I would appreciate it. David, I pledge to you and everyone watching us that none of this conversation will be edited, censored, removed, or banned, and that anyone in the world can watch the full version of this episode free at freedomplatform.tv/Icke. Thanks to the generous donations of over 32,000 people around the world that we affectionately call the London Real Army. For anybody wanting to become a founding member of the Digital Freedom Platform, they can visit freedomplatform.tv/give to donate and fight with us on the front lines to protect our human rights. Here at London Real, we've been a platform for free speech since 2011. And David, I'm excited to have you here today. I wanted to begin by bringing up everyone to speed on the recent events in our three previous conversations in 2020. So let's go there. On March 18th, you and I broadcast Rose Icke 1. Seems like ages ago, but it wasn't. Our first conversation of this year when I asked you to make sense of the early days of the coronavirus pandemic and global market crash. The UK was not yet on lockdown. In this conversation, you spoke about COVID-19 and your concept of problem, reaction, solution. You questioned the motives of the World Health Organization, and you warned of a looming Hunger Games society. This episode immediately went viral, was watched over 10 million times by people around the world that were keen to listen to a different narrative than that of the mainstream media and governments. Then, on April 6th, we broadcast our second conversation of 2020, Rose Icke 2, that became the second largest YouTube live stream in the world that day, only behind that of President of the United States, Donald Trump. With 65,000 concurrent viewers, nearly 4 times the previous episode live stream, we expected this to reach 40 million views, making it the largest video podcast in human history. In that conversation, you described the COVID-19 misdiagnosis and the misclassifications of deaths, dangerous 5G technology rollouts, the upcoming vaccine agenda, economic totalitarianism, and the weaponization of fear. Unfortunately, just 30 minutes later, the entire live stream episode was deleted and banned on YouTube with no explanation and no communication with us. 24 hours later, after the BBC broke the news, our representatives at YouTube accused you of being a COVID-19 denier and subsequently deleted and banned an additional 50 of your videos and my personal vlogs from YouTube. Next, Instagram, Facebook, and Dropbox all followed suit by deleting and banning our videos, and then London Real was completely deplatformed from LinkedIn and Vimeo without explanation. But we fought back and continued to host both episodes, Rose Icke 1 and Rose Icke 2, on our website to tens of millions of viewers, and still do to this day, despite sustaining multiple highly sophisticated malicious attacks to our technology platforms. Around the same time, David, you were completely deplatformed from both Facebook and YouTube for producing, quote, health misinformation that could cause physical harm. Of course, we all know that if this policy was universally applied, all mainstream media and most governments would have been deplatformed long ago. Next, the UK regulator Ofcom, who is controversially also in charge of issuing 5G licenses in this country, censored the broadcast of Rose Icke 1 on the television channel London Live. Ofcom said, quote, it risked causing significant harm to viewers. Harm to viewers. Yeah, as if they should be coddled. At this point, we had had enough and decided that we could no longer rely on any third-party live stream for broadcasting, nor accept the imposition of their agendas on our editorial policy. I've said it before, David, we are here not to take part, we are here to take over. So we began crowdfunding our digital freedom platform, which raised over $1.25 million from over 32,000 members of the London Real Army, fighting for our most basic human right, freedom of speech. This has been an unbelievable vote of confidence in our fight against the tyranny of censorship. On May 3rd, we successfully live broadcast Icke 3 on our brand new digital freedom platform to over 1.366 million unique viewers, making it the biggest live stream of a conversation in human history, a tremendous victory over the dark forces of censorship and oppression. Which brings us to today, 6 weeks later, where we find ourselves in a brand new world order. The media and government agenda has changed 180 degrees from the COVID-19 pandemic and lockdown to riots and protests surrounding the Black Lives Matter movement, their unidentified fundraisers, and their ulterior motives. We've witnessed anger, violence, the tearing down of monuments, and calls to defund the police across the USA and throughout the world. Before we start, I want to again ask everyone watching us to please share this, take a few seconds, go to the sidebar and post it to all your social media platforms. Simply ask your friends and family to give us 15 minutes and then they can decide. David, I'll be honest, the past 3 months of my life has been some of the most challenging times ever. My reputation has been questioned in the press. My business is under threat, and my basic human right to express myself is being denied every single day. But this has also been the most empowering time of my life, with millions of people from around the world rising up and voicing their support for what we are doing. As a result, I've never been so steadfast in my convictions to fight for the basic fundamental right of freedom of speech and freedom of press, and that is why we are here broadcasting today. David, I just want to thank you for 30 years of tireless work and for your own conviction to fight on. As I've said before, I might not agree with everything you say, but I will defend to the death your right to say it. So, David, where do we begin?
Well, I've been trashed and ridiculed and abused for 30 years. And I'm sitting here now, stronger than ever, talking to more people than ever. And I hope I've shown that you don't have to run away and hide. You can speak your truth, and people will react to it as they will. But if you keep speaking your truth and keep speaking your truth, if what you say has validity, it will eventually be shown to be so. And at that point, people who ridiculed you and dismissed you suddenly start to make the connection between what you've been saying for 30 years and events in the world. And suddenly, instead of people laughing at you in the street and pointing at you and giggling, which I had years and years and years of, suddenly they want to stop you to talk about the information. And it's so important, and we can go into this too later when we get into this whole riots and Black Lives Matter situation, that we do not give our power away by perceiving ourselves as victims. Once you consider yourself a victim, what you're saying is, I don't have power over my life anymore. Something or someone else does. And so you are accepting that you are powerless and they are powerful in relation to you. So when Facebook banned me and YouTube banned me, these facilitators of fascism, these digital book burners, you can consider yourself a victim and you can say, poor me. You can be a martyr. Oh, look, I did my best, and oh, look what's happened to me, I'm a martyr. I have no intention of being a martyr, thank you very much. I have the intention of bringing this nonsense down. And so I just want to make clear that just because these Silicon Valley giants like Facebook and YouTube delete you, doesn't mean you disappear. And what is happening now is people are starting to build an alternative communication network that operates outside of this Silicon Valley fascistic mafia. So if you look at my situation, I have davidicke.com, where people can get all of my videos and news stories every day in context with what they really mean as opposed to what the mainstream mean. We've got Iconic, which has over 700 videos, series, documentaries, podcasts, etc. And we are just about to launch a feature-length documentary called Unnatural, which exposes, and most of the people taking part are mainstream people who would never get on the mainstream media, exposing the effect on health and psychology of this electromagnetic technology and 5G. We're just about to start filming another feature-length documentary called Lethal Injection, exposing the dangers of vaccination. All my videos that were on YouTube are now on BitChute, which is the YouTube with no censorship. And as I speak, at the printers is a new book called The Answer, which I finished 2 weeks ago. So all of that is happening despite the cult censors in Silicon Valley trying to silence me. And this is what happens when you do not accept being a victim. Okay, challenge here, what we going to do about it? Not I'm a victim of it, what we going to do about it? And this great line, necessity is the mother of invention, is absolutely spot on. When you get challenges, if you are determined to overcome them, it oils the wheels of creativity. And so these challenges are wonderful opportunities. And it was essential. This is why we started Iconic in the late 2019, because we knew this censorship was coming. And we have to not be overwhelmed by it, but use it as a stimulus to build our own platforms which will not censor. And that's the way it's going, and there's a lot of great things happening.
Yeah, and there's clearly an interest, because our last conversation was the biggest in human history, and that didn't happen on a technology platform. So people want alternatives, and they'll search for them as well.
Yeah, and what's vital about what we call alternative is that they perceive pictures, they see connections. They don't just see random events. And one of the great problems, and the way that the human psyche has been manipulated, systematically, on purpose, is to symbolically and literally stop different parts of the brain talking to each other. Because if they don't, you see random everywhere. Oh, this is happening now, that's happening, oh, that's happening, that's happening. But when there is communication, you see two things. First of all, you see how things connect. You see how the dots become patterns. You see how the pixels become pictures. And it's in the pictures and the patterns that the truth lies and the revelations lie. But you also see the contradictions. See, if you're seeing a random event and you're basically seeing them in and of themselves, then you don't see the contradictions. But when you are communicating, you see what the government says here, and you see what the government says there, or some other authority or other, and you go, hold on, if that's true, right, you? Well, that can't be true then, can it? And what we've seen in this whole COVID-19 pandemic hoax of extraordinary proportions, talk about the bigger the lie, the more we'll believe it, is a tidal wave of contradictions and ridiculous demands, which when you are comparing them and seeing that contradiction, you see crystal clearly that it's a scam. And I'll give you just one example. I could give you legion. We have gone through these weeks, and we've been told that if you go out from your house arrest in ways that the government doesn't agree with, you are killing people. You're horrible. And all kind of crime of crimes. You go and protest about house arrest. You're killing people. Have a look, killing people. Media, government. And then, overnight, thousands of people are shoulder to shoulder in protests, and suddenly it's not such a big deal anymore. And when you see the connections and what the common denominators of all this are, you see why this, on the face of it, ridiculous contradiction actually makes sense. The common denominator of everything that happens in the world is, does it serve the agenda of this global cult that I've been exposing for 30 years? Or does it not serve the agenda? If it serves the agenda, it is supported, it is not banned, it is not suppressed, it is promoted in the media, and it is allowed to happen, indeed encouraged to happen. If it does not promote or support the agenda, indeed challenges it, then it's not supported, it's suppressed, it's silenced, it's demonized. So, the agenda is served by people acquiescing to house arrest and to doing what the government tells them to do in fine detail with regard to this pandemic. It is not served by people protesting against that. And so that is demonized, suppressed, etc. But the foundation of the few controlling the many, at any time in human history, it's a fundamental foundation of everything. You must divide and rule the many. So it serves the agenda of divide and rule to have people under house arrest and everyone kept apart. It serves them with social distancing where everyone is kept apart, divide. It serves them to have people wearing masks, which means that human discourse and interaction is destroyed. So social distancing, masks, house arrest must happen. But hold on a second. It also serves the agenda of divide and rule to have massive racial division. What has happened, well, almost out of nowhere, since these protests and riots began in the wake of the George Floyd situation? It has driven people apart. It is dividing society. Now that serves the agenda. And so social distancing, masks, house arrest is followed by no social distancing in the riots and the protests, but because both serve the agenda of divide, you have this apparent contradiction of social distancing imposed and then social distancing completely ignored. It's not a problem. But there's a common denominator between the two. They both serve the agenda of dividing and ruling the population. And this was captured, Brian, so perfectly in one of the most ludicrous documents I've ever seen. And it was in the last week when about 1,000 doctors and medical people and others signed a letter when the protests and the riots began. And they said, these protests, brackets, including riots, should not be stopped because of the danger of the infectious nature of COVID-19. Because it's more important that these protests take place and be allowed to take place than what they claim is an infectious disease. I don't accept that, but they do. And in this same letter, they said, but this does not mean there should be a permissive attitude and acceptance of other protests, particularly, it said, protests against stay-at-home orders. So in that one letter, you had this ridiculous contradiction that it's okay to protest without social distancing, but only if you protest here against this. But other protests, it's not. It's still dangerous. And you think that is crazy. That crazy. How can they justify that? Serves the agenda. Serves the agenda. That's what's going on. And so, in this year of extraordinary happenings, we now have the first woke virus. The first one in human history. A woke virus that says, if you protest against this, I'll leave you alone. But if you protest against that, I'm coming for you. And of course that's ludicrous, but you've got to see this common denominator. And if people take this and look at the world from this perspective, the common theme is, does it serve the agenda or does it not? They will see across the great spectrum of human society how what is allowed and encouraged and promoted serves the agenda, and what is suppressed, demonized, and prevented challenges the agenda. It's so simple, and that's why on the face of it we're seeing madness, but if you come here, there's method in the madness.
How do you get people to see that? Because, I've had a lot of conversations offline with friends of mine, and, black people in America see this happen, another act of police violence, another scenario of rioting like we saw in Watts in 65, Rodney King in 92, and again, and they're like, I'm angry. And it seems like a systemic issue of, police racism. How do you get someone like that to step out of the anger and emotion and try to look at it from this perspective that you're bringing? Because they have a right to be angry, and yet, like you said, they're actually potentially playing into someone else's agenda.
Well, if people don't want to be scammed, first of all, they have to get informed, and they have to stop getting all their perceptions from the mainstream media. Because you look at the what we might call the conservative or political right, what you might call the moderate political right, and you look at the woke mentality, and they may be at odds with each other, but overwhelmingly they're getting their information from the same mainstream sources. They're just seeing that information in a different way. When you step back from mainstream sources and you look at alternative sources where narratives are being questioned instead of parroted and repeated, then you can start to see how the dots connect. You see, it's not what is happening that is the point of revelatory understanding. It's why it's happening. It's context. Yes, this is happening, okay, and if you react only on the basis of this is happening, then you can get sucked in and start behaving in ways that the authorities and the cult behind the authorities want you to act. But if you stop and you ask, why is this happening? Then you can start to get context. See, what's missing is context. You know, the mainstream media will tell you that something's happening. They'll put their own spin on it, of course, but they'll tell you that something's happening. But they won't tell you accurately, unbiasedly, why it's happening. So when I have this phrase, know the outcome and you'll see the journey. If you don't know where the world's being taken and who by, and the techniques of manipulation that take us there, then the world is a random place. You look at a newspaper and you look at the news or whatever, and lots of random things are happening. And it's very difficult, almost impossible, it is impossible, from that perspective of perceptual randomness to make sense of the world. Not going to do it. But when you know where the world's being taken, you know basically who's taking us there, why, and the techniques of manipulation to take us there, suddenly randomness disappears. Because what is random to most people becomes a very clear sequence of events that is taking us in a very obvious direction towards the outcome. And so, like I say, fundamental to manipulating humanity to take this journey towards the global Orwellian state is to set the target population at war with itself. You know, during the lockdowns, you've had this big conflict going on between people who say, you know, we should be allowed to go out, and other people say, oh, you can't go out, you're killing people. And then right on the back of that, we have this division on the grounds of race. And, you know, I keep coming back to this, but it's absolutely vital in my view. We are different points of attention within a infinite stream of consciousness. That's who we are. You are an expression of the same stream of consciousness that I'm an expression of. You are looking at life and reality from a slightly different angle, and others will be looking at life from a very different angle, but they are the same consciousness. And we are experiencing a almost infinitesimally small, short experience in what is called a human. So what is a human? A human is a way of processing information. So the human body, the human brain, the human genetic system processes information in a certain way, and we call that human. And when we reach that point that we call death, the consciousness that's experiencing that and having these series of experiences we call human, then withdraws from the body, I call it biological computer, which processes information in a certain way. And that's why near-death experiences, in there now millions, describe that when they leave the body, when the body dies, reality is completely different to what it is as a human. Because what the body does is it focuses, and this is vital, I'm coming around to these riots and this racial division in a second. What the body does is focus our attention in a band of frequency, and that band of frequency is absolutely tiny. According to mainstream science, the electromagnetic spectrum is 0.005% of what exists in the universe. Some say it's a bit more, but not much. And visible light, which is the only band of frequency that we can perceive as a reality, is a smear of the 0.005%. And this is the body and the brain focusing our attention on this particular band of frequency. And in that period, which is ridiculously short, we have an experience by that information processing called being human. Now, imagine this, people realized that they are infinite, eternal expressions of consciousness, having a brief experience called human, with a series of labels given to different humans like white and black and Asian and transgender and gay and straight and all these labels. What are those labels? They are experiences. That's all they are. Brief experiences. When we leave the body, these massive number of people now have reported these near-death experiences. When they leave the body, they're not still Bill driving a bus. They're not Ethel on the checkout. They're expansive consciousness, which, as they describe, they can experience past, present, future, all in the same moment, and they undergo this massive expansion of consciousness. Why? Because they've left the body, which is focusing the attention of that consciousness within this narrow band of frequency. Now, if you knew that's what we were, that we're all one, that we're all expressions of each other, we're just different perceptual states of the same consciousness, having brief experiences with these labels. Try dividing and ruling that. Very, very difficult. And if there's a few of you and you want to control the many, you have to divide and rule the many and set them at war with each other. Otherwise, the few can't control the many. You have to get the many to acquiesce to you. Otherwise, the few can't control the many. And so what they've had to do is get humanity to self-identify the I with the labels. So you say to someone, who are you? They might say, I'm a white man from Barnsley who used to work in the mines. No, that's what you have experienced. That's not you. You are the consciousness that had the experience. Someone might say, I'm a black guy from the southern states of America, and I do this, I do that, and this is my background, this is my life story, this is what I do, this is my job. No. That's what you're experiencing. You, the I, the eternal I, the true I, are the consciousness having that experience, which will move on when that experience is over. Nightmare for divide and rulers. So what you have to do, you have to get them to self-identify with the label. And once you've got someone saying, I am black, I am white, I am transgender, I am gay, there's nothing wrong with saying those things, as long as we understand that they are not the I, they are the experience. But if you take those labels to be the I, what you are, now you have infinite potential for playing the labels off against each other. And what they've been doing systematically is manipulating people into smaller and smaller minutiae of self-identity. So now we have this long list of letters, LGBT, blah, 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 to describe the fine detail of a minutiae of self-identity. And this has created more and more potential for divide and rule. So now we have feminist activists at war with transgender activists.
Yeah.
And so as the sense of the I becomes more and more subdivided and subdivided and subdivided, the potential for divide and rule and setting the target population at war with itself becomes infinite. I mean, it's only limited by the number of labels you can come up with. And my goodness me, that list of letters seems to get longer all the time. So when we reach the point where saying all lives matter is considered racist, you know you're in a crazy place. But again, let's come back to the cult, its agenda, its methods of operation. What does all lives matter say? It says we are one. Everyone is equally valid, no matter what the color of your skin, no matter what the nature of your religion, no matter what the nature of your sexuality. We are all different expressions of the same whole. What is that doing? It's bringing people together. Unity. What is the worst nightmare of a global cult seeking to impose its will on humanity? Unity, harmony, coming together. So Black Lives Matter is a division. It says not all lives matter and everyone should be seen as equally valid. It says we are going to focus on one part of that whole. And when you focus on one part of the whole, you start dividing it from another part of the whole. And so we're having this division between a black society and so-called white privilege. And it's fundamentally dividing people. And not only that, you have a situation where this part of the division, lots of people in the black community, the great majority of people in the black community can see it, but they don't get to the microphones. I'm talking about those that get to the microphones, that kind of lead these riots and stuff. What are they saying to white people? That we don't just want you to accept that we are equal to you. We want you to get on your knees. We want you to get on your knees and admit your white privilege. Now, what level of division does that create? And what does it say when people are being demanded to get on their knees? Where does the cult want humanity as a whole? It wants us on our knees. I've got a book I wrote a few years ago called Human Race, Get Off Your Knees, ironically, rather appropriate today. What's all this about? And when we come to this whole, the great illusion and the one that we are being pressured to accept is that different groups, whether they're black, white, or whatever, can be judged as one whole, as if they're all the same. So you have this group good, can't be criticized. This group bad, say what you bloody like. And what that does, again, coming back to the same theme, is it creates group situations which you can divide and rule. Now, when you come back to what I was saying a few minutes ago, we are all points of attention within the same infinite whole. Well, those different points of attention, different perspectives, different states of being, mind, attitudes, they manifest through every single group. They manifest through white people, through black people, through Asian people, through transgender people, through gay people, through straight people, whatever. And if you look at people's individual behavior, irrespective of their color, creed, religion, or background, their individual behavior, what you're then doing is you are looking at people devoid of any input of what color they are, or background they are, or sexuality they are. You're looking at an individual. And when you judge individual behavior rather than group behavior, now the ability to divide and rule is basically finished. Because what you're saying is, and I'll say it as many times as I need to, white people have so many great people, and they have psychopaths, a goodly number of them. Black people have enormous numbers of great people, and they have psychopaths. Asian people have great people, they have psychopaths. Transgender people have great people, and psychopaths and narcissistic dividers. Same with every group. So what the cult wants us to do is to go into this group judgment, because then they can divide and rule the target population, with one hand while having a cup of tea with the other. It's so easy. And so I look at Black Lives Matter in terms of current events.
And can you even talk about the events of George Floyd's death and what you saw that day, and then how, the reaction against the police and defunding the police and Black Lives Matter?
Well, that's the point, Brian, okay? Which comes exactly on from what I've just been talking about. What are the police? They are a group. There are great people and there are psychopaths, like every other group. But what they want us to do, you see the pattern again and again and again. Judge the group by the group label, good, horrible. Don't judge individual behavior. Because when you judge individual behavior, the group played off against other groups disappears. Can't happen. So the cult doesn't want that. It doesn't want you looking at people as individuals, irrespective of their background. So you look at the police. So defund the police. What happened to George Floyd? And I think there's a lot more to know about that situation, by the way. But what happened to George Floyd was appalling. Of course it was appalling. And I've spent decades criticizing the psychopaths in the police. And I've done it over the lockdowns, narcissistic, power-crazy police officers imposing these lockdown rules ludicrously because it gives them power and obviously, little dick syndrome and all that stuff. But there's some great police officers as well. And when people are in trouble and someone's breaking into their house or whatever, who do they call? They call the police. And most of the time, the police will come and they'll do their best. But what we're being asked to believe, again, this is this same recurring theme, is to look at the police as one whole. Police, horrible. No. Great people, okay people, psychopaths. And if people cared about making a difference instead of just making a frickin' noise, they would say, okay, we do need reform. Yes, absolutely. But we don't want to get rid of the great police officers who put often their lives at risk day after day in some countries and situations. We want rid of the psychopaths, right? We want rid of those who are biased in terms of race against certain communities. We want rid of them. So we're going to get rid of them. And we're going to change things, so we're going to weed them out. Now that would then make a difference to communities, because you've got more and more genuine police officers are going to turn up at your door, and fewer of the psychopaths.
But I think people feel like that's not going to happen because they feel like they've asked for that before, and then they vent their frustration. It feels like violence happens when people can't communicate.
Yeah, but let's take this on. So instead of that, you have all the police demonized together and defund the police. In effect, abolish the police. But so when someone's breaking into your house or something nasty is happening to you, who are you going to call? Who are you going to call? There's going to be no one to call. So who is going to be dictating society then? The might is right. The mob, those with the guns or those with the muscle, are going to control society. And what we've seen in this situation in Seattle, where Black Lives Matter have taken over, Black Lives Matter supporters, Black Lives Matter have taken over 6 blocks and called it an autonomous zone, in next to no time, a hierarchy appears. There's people who are calling themselves the police in that autonomous zone, going around with guns. And there's a kind of a leading figure, this rapper, what's his name, Raz Simone, with a gun on his back. You see, you can have these ideas of, oh, just get rid of it, no shades of grey, literally black and white. Or you can have a bit of maturity and say, well, look, this thing needs improving, but you can't just throw it aside. It will be chaos. And when you create the void of the chaos, something will fill it. And it will be a hierarchy in which the mob will rule. And if you are a mob, or certainly leaders of the mob, then what do you want to gain the kind of power that you want? You want rid of the police. And if we come back to Black Lives Matter, look at who funds them. Now, there's a lot of black people who have sussed all this. But they've been funded by George Soros, right? And when you look at the agenda of this cult that I've been exposing for 30 years, and then you look at these funders for the cult, like Soros, the organizations they fund, just by coincidence, just tend to have the same agenda as the cult. So, for instance, Black Lives Matter are now calling, not just for defunding the police and abolishing the police, but getting rid of prisons. Now, there are many people in prison who shouldn't be there. But there are some people in prison who should as hell be there for the safety and protection of society as a whole. So here you have Black Lives Matter calling for the end of prisons. And I've been writing in my books for years that what the cult wants to create is a basically, I think one of their documents called it a jungle atmosphere, a jungle society, basically where there is no law, where the mob rules. Going back to 1871, there was a letter sent by a high Freemason called Albert Pike to another member of this cult, describing a series of things that were going to happen through the 20th century, because this cult agenda is projected right into the what we call the future. This is why Aldous Huxley and George Orwell were so accurate in describing current events, because this is why I've been so accurate in describing current events. Because if you can access this projected agenda, then you can predict the future, because unless something comes to intervene to stop it happening, it will happen, and you will appear to predict the future. What you're actually doing is saying this is what the agenda plans for humanity. One of the things that Pike said in this letter in 1871 was they were going to unleash the nihilists. And if you look at the definition of a nihilist, it's what's happening now. And they want to create chaos, fear, upheaval, especially in this period between now and 2030, when they want to transform human society. They're in the process of it. This whole pandemic hoax was massively part of it, and so's current events. They want to transform human society into an Orwellian global fascist technocratic dictatorship that would make George Orwell wince and say, my God, I underestimated it. Now, while they're doing that, they want the population looking in the other direction. They don't want them sitting back and connecting the dots. They want them constantly reacting to chaos, upheaval. And that's why we've gone seamlessly, and it seems to be like another random event. It's not. It's all part of the same progression, what I call the totalitarian tiptoe. We've gone seamlessly from the lockdown situation into the protests and the riots. So if you go back to Black Lives Matter, what the cult wants is upheaval, fear, and crime, anything that will create chaos and fear among the community. And one of the things they want is to get as many of the prisoners that should be in jail out of jail as possible and into society, so the chaos and the fear and the upheaval can manifest and grow. So here's a situation. You've got George Soros, who through his Open Society foundations has funded Black Lives Matter. And he has an agenda to empty the prisons, basically.
Why? Why does he want to do that?
For the reasons I've just described.
Chaos.
Chaos, upheaval, crime, fear, rule of the mob, might is right, defund the police while all this is going on. This is what they want.
Right. Rich people don't need the police, do they?
No, of course not. They sit behind walled houses and homes. They have their own private protection systems. I mean, we had a classic this week where a major politician in LA was calling to defund the police, the Los Angeles police, by like $150 million or something. And she was exposed as having her own, basically, private police protection unit from the same people she wanted to defund. But if I go back to Soros...
Yeah, I had Alan Dershowitz on the show this last week, famous criminal lawyer, and he said, I don't use the police. I have private security. He said, I don't remember the last time I called the police, because I don't need to call the police, because he had the funds not to do it.
Yeah, so. He also has the connections not to do it as well. Don't start me on Alan Dershowitz. We could go off in another direction.
We'll get to that.
Not least in the Epstein direction. But anyway, going back to Soros. So he has this agenda for basically, A, getting prisoners out of prisons, violent prisoners, and B, not putting away violent people who should be put away. So he started massively funding the campaigns of the DAs, district attorneys in America, to put into those positions people he controlled, which he's successfully done in many cases, who would stop imposing the law and putting violent people away on the scale they should be. And these district attorneys have done exactly that. So Soros has this agenda. He's put so much money into doing this. Soon as the the coronavirus thing, pandemic hoax, I would call it, started, Soros is calling for prisoners to be let out of prison, and thousands were, on the grounds of the coronavirus. And Soros is funding Black Lives Matter that wants to abolish prisons. I mean, hello? One of the agendas that I've been highlighting now for the best part of 30 years is that this cult wants to destroy the family, wants to destroy the family unit, so the state can bring up children from the start and have complete control of their minds. Why does a Black Lives Matter organization that claims to stand for racial justice have an agenda for this was the phrase, disrupting the Western family unit, basically, which is the same agenda as the cult? Why do 1% billionaires like Soros, 1% corporations like Cisco, 1% foundations galore fund Black Lives Matter when they could not give a shit about black people or any other apart from themselves? Why would they do that? And here's a kicker. This cult that I've been exposing all these decades, it's not just a modern phenomenon. It goes way back. It's just been increasing its power as it's more and more centralized power and gathered more and more wealth to itself, hence the symbolic 1%. But it goes way back. Now here's an irony of ironies. The same cult, families and networks that were behind slavery and the imposition on black people of slavery are the same networks, the same cult that funds Black Lives Matter. What is going on? Here's another irony of ironies. This cult, at its core, is almost entirely white. And it is funding Black Lives Matter in basically a war on white people. Get on your knees and confess your white privilege. That includes white people living in the streets of San Francisco, does it? Alongside black people. And I'll come to that in a second, what this is really about. Because it's not a race war, it's a class war. So why would this core of white people at the core of this cult want to create a war on white people? Because this is not a division of white people in the cult and other groups and communities and colors and races within the human family. This is a war between the cult and the entirety of humanity. White, black, sky blue, bloody pink, all of us. And to win that war, it has to divide and rule the target population. And there was a great quote I saw a few days ago by a New Yorker journalist. I think she was called Jane Mayer. And it was words to the effect of, for the 1% to win America, but this is a global thing really, but to win America, they had to rebrand themselves as the champion of the other 99%. Now, this is exactly what has happened. So now you have this cult funding through its various corporations and billionaires, organizations that are dividing and ruling the black community too. I don't like using that black community, white community. We are one whole. If only we could see it. But to divide and rule, black from white, etc., they're doing it because they have to do it. Because they unified together, we are all different expressions of the same whole. Humanity cannot be imposed upon by a tiny few. This is a war by the cult, which at its core happens to be white, against the entirety of humanity. So, what is the biggest problem that people have in terms of opportunity, choice, and of course, what is freedom except choice? The more choice you have, the more freedom you have. The less choice you have, the less freedom you have. But what is it that decides choice, opportunity? Economics, money. So you look at deprived white people, and they are legion. You look at deprived, economically deprived, I'm talking about, black people. They are legion. The reason that they don't have opportunity and choice is they don't have the money to make those choices and decide those opportunities. So here you have, symbolically, I literally, actually, as I mentioned a few minutes ago, you have black people and white people sleeping in the streets of cities because they are in the same economically deprived, limited situation. Now, what the cult doesn't want is those people, black, white, and all the other colors and whatever, in that situation, to come together to challenge what's going on. They don't want that. So what are they doing? They're dividing deprived people and putting them at war with each other. And this, therefore, is not a race war. It's an economic war. It's a class war. It's setting the population at war with itself, while at the same time, those in the shadows that are funding all this, you look at all these woke organizations, you look at all these different expressions of transgender organizations and all these different expressions of woke, you look at these organizations based on political correctness, which is manipulating the population to silence itself. And these 1% corporations are funding all of them. George Soros has put $32 billion into his Open Society foundations. You've got Gates, the funding to the tune of staggering amounts of money, almost unthinkable amounts of money. And he's funding all these cult agendas, including vaccines and the health system globally. All these 1%ers are funding these groups that think they're challenging the 1%. George Soros has said that he doesn't take into consideration the social consequences of what he does. He's just there to make money. Why would he be funding Black Lives Matter? Why would he be funding this great spectrum of woke organizations that claim to be fighting the system? He is the frickin' system.
What do you say to someone of color in America who is hearing everything you say right now, David? They're saying, yes, I get it. Being funded by Soros Open Society Foundations, Cisco $5 million, Airbnb $500,000, Dropbox, who banned us, $500,000, Intel $1 million. They say, yeah, we know that they're funding it, but for us, this seems like the only voice we have. And it feels like there's white people marching with us and black people, and we want to do something, but this seems like the only option. What do you say to them?
if the only option is being funded by the 1% and the cult, then there is no option. Because it's a simple question, ladies and gentlemen. Why are they funding you? And then it comes back to this question, a question of the ages that should be asked many times every day. Who benefits? Who benefits from me believing what the authorities are telling me to believe? Who benefits from me acting upon what the authorities are telling me to believe? Who benefits from this organization being funded by these 1% corporations and billionaires? And if you keep asking that question, the same answer will come back. Anyone that wants to advance the agenda of dividing and ruling the population and imposing more and more control of humanity. Who benefits from people accepting the official narrative of a virus which is shot full of so many holes in terms of contradictions? Who benefits from just following that without question, and thus 3 billion plus going under house arrest because, on the say-so of a handful of people? Who benefits? The handful of people. Even more important, the cult in the shadows behind the handful of people, most of whom don't even realize there's a cult. So keep asking that question, who benefits? Who benefits from me accepting social distance? Who benefits from me putting a mask on so that all human discourse is done for, basically, as with social distancing? Anyone that wants to divide humanity. Who benefits from me allowing my children to go to school now and have little areas marked out in the playground that they have to stand in, and they can't have interaction with their mates and friends in the playground for a virus I say absolutely has never existed? But even if you accept it does, the latest estimate of the infection to death rate by the Centers for Disease and Control in America, which is an absolute establishment World Health Organization connected organization, the infection to death rate is 0.26%. So when your bits of your brain are talking to each other, they say, hold on a minute, 0.26% infection to death rate? Even if it exists, I say it doesn't, but and we're putting kids in little areas in the playground so they can't go near their mates. What? So for that, we've got an economic catastrophe, people's independent livelihoods destroyed, which I said in our first interview before the lockdowns even happened was the whole one of the major reasons for this pandemic hoax. So that loads of businesses are never going to open again. Unemployment eventually, as this plays out, is going to be absolutely catastrophic. And it's for something, even if we accept it exists, of an infection to death rate of 0.26%. And then, because I accept that and don't question it, they're using that as an excuse to bring in tracing and tracking technology, which is just 24/7 surveillance of the population. And they want eventually to have a massive globally imposed vaccine because of something that has an infection to death rate of 0.26%. When your brain is communicating and having a chat, different parts of it, you go, that's total bollocks. I'm not accepting that. But how many people just accept it? And then you ask the question again, who benefits? Who benefits from people just accepting that? Anyone that wants to introduce that list of things and make happen those list of things that I've just talked about. Now, what is happening with the kids? We come back. We're all one. We all are expressions of each other. Worst nightmare for the cult that we suss that. That our labels are just brief experiences. Worst nightmare. They want people to be fearful of each other and to be driven apart. So now they're getting the kids at the earliest possible age to live their entire lives with a perception of division, with a perception of fear, with an absence of hugging and contact. It's exactly what they want, because as I've said in the books over the years, they want us to fuse with machines. So we're being pushed more and more into interaction with machines and AI, and being pulled out of interaction, human interaction. This is what's happening. And now they've got their excuse to start with the kids at the earliest possible age. This is what's happening. We're looking at a massive psychological programming of humanity to totally transform human perception of the world and human perception of each other. And this whole climate change hoax is being driven by the same 1%, the same cult that's driven the coronavirus hoax, and is driving this racial division. And you look at what is demanded by the climate, I call it the climate cult, and you look at what is demanded to respond to the coronavirus hoax, and they're pretty much exactly the same. What is the climate cult saying about humanity? We're dangerous. Humanity's dangerous. They're horrible, humanity. Some of them are even so extreme, they're calling for humanity just to stop breeding so that we disappear. And so you've got these common themes all the time. What do they say must happen to save the planet? Centralization of power on a global level to dictate global policy over saving the world. What is happening with the pandemic? Centralization of power, centralization of power. Look at how the West has become China more and more since this coronavirus hoax was played. And China, as I've said so many times, is the blueprint for how they want the world to be. If you want to know what the cult wants the world to be, and human society to be, look at China. That's what it wants, and then some.
Digital police state.
Exactly that. And so, if we don't ask who benefits and just accept what we're told without question, then what happens is we just go on going further and further and further down this road to a beyond Orwellian nightmare, centralized, technocratic, no more democratic elections, tyranny. And of course it's moved on very quickly since the virus hoax was played out.
If I'm a person of color, though, what do I do? If I'm listening to you right now and I'm like, oh my gosh, I just saw it. I just saw how I'm dividing. I just saw how Black Lives Matter is formed. But I still want to do something because I don't want to see these injustices still happening.
Okay.
What do I do?
You know what I'd say the first thing? Don't call yourself black. Don't call yourself black. I don't call myself white. I don't self-identify with white, you see. What do I self-identify with? I am consciousness having an experience through a body that happens to be white. I would be just as delighted to be having an experience through a body that happened to be black or Jewish or Arab. Don't matter to me. Asian. Don't matter to me. It's a vehicle for experience. I am the consciousness having the experience. So once you self-identify, the I, with a label, the cult has already got you. Because now you're seeing yourself in incredibly limited terms. What is a black person? What is a white person? It is a short experience called human. And so try this. Instead of saying I am black, I am white, I am whatever, I am all that is, has been, and ever can be, having an experience called a black body, a white body, an Asian body, whatever. But that's all. Why are we, who are an expression of an infinite flow of consciousness, limiting ourselves in our self-identity to I am black or I am white? Once you say I am white and I am black, now divisions can occur. Whereas if I am an expression of consciousness in a white body, you are an expression of consciousness in a black body, the connection is we're the same consciousness having different experiences. That's the point, that we connect. Not I am white, you are black. We are the same consciousness having a different experience. And at that level of consciousness, we can have unity. And if I'm an expression of the same consciousness as that you are, I want you to have the justice that I have. I want you to have the opportunities that I have. Therefore, I'm not going to look at you as a black person. I'm going to look at you as an expression of consciousness in a certain situation. And therefore, if I can help you get a better situation by society changing or even me doing individual things, then that's the way to do it. But I'm doing it because you are an expression of the same consciousness as I am, and I want you to have the same opportunities. I'm not doing it because you're black. I mean, how many white people do things or say things in relation to, say, black people? Because it's not for the benefit of black people, it's the benefit of their own image, their own kind of virtue signaling. They need to be, oh, look, I'm a good person, look what I'm saying. Yeah, but is it making any difference? No. And the other thing about, it's always frustrated me about, not just, you know, the way black people are treated and incredibly patronized, but how lots of people, white people and other races, are who are in positions of deprivation. And let's not, by the way, get caught in the idea that one group or one race is in totality deprived. This great spectrum of vastly rich black people across to deprived black people. There's a great spectrum of vastly rich white people across to deprived white people. It's the deprivation that should unite us and not the race to divide us. We should be doing something about those economic situations irrespective of color. But set them at war with each other and they'll be so focused on fighting each other they won't see you holding the strings attached to both. And when I talk about patronizing, see, there's been some brilliant videos posted in the last week or two by black people, highly intelligent, who've sussed it and have the courage, and it takes some, to speak out against the official narrative of Black Lives Matter, i.e. The 1%, if you go into the core of it. And they've pointed out, for instance, that there's a whole vast network that's in place to help the deprived, to help the downtrodden. And it relies for its existence and its income on people being deprived and downtrodden. So they don't really have a great interest in there being no deprived and downtrodden people because their network's no longer necessary. And they've also pointed out and this applies to anybody of any color and any background, the complete demoralization and disempowerment that comes with being told you're a victim. Because once you think you're a victim, you perceive yourself as powerless. Some outside force that you think is victimizing you has control over your life. But only if you let it. You know, I was born into a council house in Leicester in 1952. And we lived in what would have been called, especially in the early part of my childhood, in a deprived situation. I remember hiding behind the sofa with my mum when the rent man knocked on the door, because we couldn't pay. And when he'd knocked on the door and they got no answer, he'd come to the window and look through the window. That's why we were hiding behind the sofa until he went. I was going around the back of the factory on a Thursday, holding my mum's hand to get that week's wages so we could eat that night. Now, I did not see myself as deprived, and you know, people said to me in that situation. I remember it said to me from time to time as I grew up, "Know your class, know your class, know where you've come from." Well, I never bought that. Because I've never bought class. And I've never bought being a victim. Oh, look, poor me. Of course, that is the end. Because you are acknowledging you have no power. So I never bought that I had a deprived background economically. Certainly wasn't deprived in any other way. I never bought the idea that I was a certain class. I didn't buy any of that shite. And I set about building my life on the basis of my own efforts and my own direction that I wanted to go. And it's possible to do that. It's possible for anyone to do that. But it's impossible if you think you're a victim and someone else is the cause of your situation. Now, the system is rigged. And it's not rigged against black people. It's rigged against the great majority of all people. That's why the 1% is the 1%. That's why a handful of men own the equivalent of the wealth owned by the poorest half of the world population. Because the system's rigged. But if you you look at that and you say they're in control, they're in charge, there's nothing we can do, then they're going to be in charge and there's nothing we can do. But why are they the 1% and the rest of us not? Because we have systematically, generation after generation after generation, given our power away to them. We have acquiesced to them, generation after generation after generation, of all colors and creeds. And what's happened is every time we've acquiesced, we've given them more power, we've given ourselves less. And it reaches the point where we have conceded so much of our power that it's in the hands of the few who then recycle it back against us. And so this word acquiescence is absolutely key. If you acquiesce to the fact that you're a victim, you'll be a bloody victim. If you acquiesce to what authority tells you without question or challenge, you'll just be a slave of the system. What has happened during this lockdown, this whole coronavirus? Vast numbers of people have acquiesced to the tiny few that is dictating this, and dictating this fine detail of what you can do and what you can't do. And you know what it's all about? You know, you've got these situations where they've come out with rules that, well, you can see your one parent in a park, but you can't see them in the garden because you might have to go through the house. Yeah, okay. You can see one parent in the park, and then you can see another parent, but you can't see them together. One grandparent, not together. And you look at all these rules and fine detail. You've got to wear a mask where the pores are much bigger than viral particles, so they're a waste of bloody time anyway, and you'll be breathing in your own carbon dioxide and not oxygen, so that's going to have respiratory consequences if it goes on for long enough. And you know what they're going to do when those respiratory consequences happen? They're going to call it COVID-19. All these things, what are they doing? It's a psychological game. They know that the more ridiculous things they can tell you to do, which you then do and acquiesce to, the more acquiescent you are becoming, step by step by step, to the point where you no longer have a capacity for free thought. You just do whatever you're told, like some automaton. And this is what is happening. You've got to wear masks on public transport, on trains, on ferries, on buses. Okay. So from tomorrow,
taxis
in Britain, taxis, they will, right? What if a carriage full of people on a train said, we ain't doing it. We ain't doing it. What are you going to do? Call the guard. Call the guard. Guard comes down. Got to have masks on. We're not going to put them on. What's he going to do? What's anybody going to do if enough people say we're not doing it? The power of this cult through the generations to present time, the power of this 1% is merely the power humanity acquiesces to them constantly. And I was on the ferry coming over today, and this lady came round. There's hardly anybody on the ferry who was a passenger. And she starts telling everybody that tomorrow this is what has to happen. You've got to have a mask, you've got to do this, got to do that. And I started questioning her about masks and got a clue. Didn't know anything about them. But what's happened? This is how it works. You've got the cult in the shadows, and they operate through the permanent governments, the financial system, the medical system, the governmental system, the media system, etc. And as it comes down the hierarchy, you reach the level of administering into reality what the cult has dictated. And apart from the very, very high ups of this administrative level of this hierarchical pyramid, they won't even know there is a cult. But each level both takes and acquiesces to the diktats above them and imposes that upon those below them, who then acquiesce and pass it on and impose it on the next level. And so it all the way comes down. That's the administrative level, symbolized by this lady who works for the ferry company today. And then it comes down to the massive population, billions of people. And what the vast majority of them do is then take this hierarchical system of top-down acquiescence and imposition, and they acquiesce to what they're told. If they didn't do that, if they ask questions like, who benefits? Well, actually, you benefit. I don't benefit from doing this. You benefit. So what's the game? Why do you want me to do this? What's in it for you? Instead of doing that, you just acquiesce. You just do it. And I've been talking the last few days, if the World Health Organization came out and said, well, doctors say that wearing Mickey Mouse ears can be a protection against the virus. Some people will wear Mickey Mouse ears. And you get Facebook putting Mickey Mouse ears adverts in front of you. But if we didn't acquiesce to it, if we said we're not going to allow our kids to be put in chalk circles or locked off small areas, alone, disconnected from all the other kids, we're not doing it. Our kids ain't going to school until that crap is finished. What would they have to do? They'd have to stop it. But people don't. Fortunately, a vast number of people have looked at the world in its extreme expression in the last few months, and they've actually seen, the world is not like I thought it was, and there has been an awakening. But that's only step one. You can stand on the other side of the street, and you can start to understand the game, and you can start to see the game on the other side of the street, and you can start to work out what's happening and why they're doing this and why they're doing that. But that's step one. Step two is crossing the road and engaging with the system. But it's not even protest. What is protest? You know, so many protests, they protest and they protest and then they go home, and what changes? Nothing. And nothing will change until we stop acquiescing to the system and stop cooperating with our own enslavement. When that happens, it's game over. And I'll give you an example. It's so potent. How many of those people out protesting and trying to knock down statues, which is all part of removing history, which is a cult agenda, been in my books for years, but that's the idea. It's like Orwell said, who controls the past controls the future, who controls the present controls the past. And what they're doing is getting rid of history of the past. They're getting rid of the old normal in every way, so we then, through the generations, forget the old normal even exists, so the new normal can become.
Do they have legitimate arguments that I don't want to see a monument that reminds me of, you know, racism in my country from 100 years ago? Well,
why not put a plaque on it explaining the good things the person did, if they did any, and also warts and all? So we have an historical reference that includes the entirety of what that person did. Yes, he gave money to hospitals. Yes, he gave money to build schools, but he also had slaves and made his money from slavery. So we have history. Where we've come from gives us a fix on where we are. When you remove all knowledge of history, you lose focus and understanding of where you are. For instance, Marxist regimes have cost the lives of 100 million people. Now, if we have that in our history and we know it, we know that ain't a place to go. Because what happens is you have the revolution, and at the end of the revolution eats itself because another tyranny replaces the one you're revolting against. So you'd say, well, no, we can't go down that road. Look what's happened, 100 million people. China, Cambodia, etc. Soviet Union. But if you can remove that and dilute it, that's what's been happening in the schools and universities, the diluting of history and the teaching of history, then you can persuade people that haven't got that knowledge that maybe Marxism is a good way to go. And you've got so much of the woke mentality calling for a Marxism. Hold on a minute, 100 million dead people. It's a frickin' tyranny, just like fascism. But if you have your history, you know that in the present. If you don't, it's all new to you. Oh yeah, Marxism, that sounds like a good idea. And so if you look at Orwell's 1984, he wrote a lot about the need to destroy history, because that allows you to control the perception of the present by controlling the perception of the past. It's very important. You know, this great line about if we don't learn the lessons of history, we are destined to repeat them. Well, they don't want us to learn the lessons of history, because so many things that have happened in history, they want to happen now, but in the modern sense.
So if we remove those statues, we might actually repeat what's going to happen in the past, possibly.
Yeah, well, yeah, but I mean, you know, if people want to decide to put those statues in a museum or something and put other statues up, but and again, who the hell hasn't got a warts and all? You know what I mean? I don't quote the Bible very much, but let he who hath no sin cast the first stone is a good one. And like I said earlier, if we're not streetwise and informed, you can get groups of people motivated and driven by an organization funded by the same network behind slavery to demand that statues are brought down, or indeed pull them down with chains, because of their connection to slavery. Eh? Crazy, man. But this is what happens when you don't get informed and you just react instead of look at the wider picture. Slavery was appalling, but don't let's kid ourselves that it ended, just taken a different form. Slavery is massive in the world today. Children trafficking, people trafficking, endless around the world. And the human race in itself is enslaved because of its inability to make choices, thus have the freedom to decide its own destiny because of the impositions upon them, not least economic. So don't let's get the idea that slavery was a period. Slavery is still going on today, and all slavery needs to be addressed. And we're only, you know, what is more enslaved than someone who acquiesces to authority without question? That's self-enslavement. And if we want to be free, then we have to demand freedom. Not just demand freedom, we have to act freedom. So when people say you're going to do this, you just don't do it. If you think this is enslaving, or this is enslaving, or this is destroying my freedom, legitimate freedom in a free society, like you must do this, you must do that, you must wear a mask, then if you acquiesce to it, then we're enslaving ourselves. Do you want to wear that mask? Well, no, I think it's ridiculous, but I better do it because this bloke in a peak cap's just told me I've got to. Well, do it. And if more and more people, enough people don't do it, then the guy in the peak cap's got no power whatsoever. But we give our power to these people. We talk about, oh, he's just a job's worth, you know, all that stuff. Well, don't do what he says then. You know, the answers are staring us in the face. The few control the many of all colors, creeds, because the many give their power to the few. We've got to stop doing it and stop being divided and fighting among ourselves, so we don't focus on that which is enslaving all of us. You know, it's crazy. And why this is important, so vital at the time we're talking here, is that what has happened with this lockdown and this virus hoax, and what is happening with this racial divide and rule, is part of an ongoing sequence. And if we go on acquiescing, ladies and gentlemen, and fighting among ourselves, that sequence is going to reach fruition. And I would ask people who are more focused on pulling down a statue than asking why kids are chalked off in a playground. What is going to happen at the end of this sequence? See, what this period of protest and some cases looting and thuggery has had many reasons why it's happening now. And one of them is to divert attention from what's just happened. We have been lied to about a virus and its deadly nature. We have a test for the virus that doesn't test for the virus. We're just told it does. We are told that people are dying of the virus when what's happening is monumental numbers of death certificates have got COVID-19 on them when the person died of anything but. We had a quote from a doctor, a British doctor, Malcolm Kendrick, I think his name was, works for the National Health Service in Britain. He said in an article a couple of weeks ago that he knows that other doctors were putting COVID-19 on the death certificate for all deaths from early March onwards, right? So this is where the death figures are coming from. Redesignated diagnosis and COVID-19 on death certificates. In places like America, they have thousands of dollars a time incentives to do that. We've had Imperial College issue computer models that anyone with a smear of intelligence could see from the start were ludicrous in terms of the projected death figures, which caused the lockdown, justified the lockdown in America too. 500,000 could die in Britain, 2 million in America, all this stuff, which was designed to justify the lockdown, because lockdown was necessary for all the things they wanted to follow. As a result of this extraordinary level of deceit and mendacity, the economic system has been devastated. Towards the end of this year, unemployment is going to be beyond belief. We had the GDP of Britain fall by 20% in April. In the crash of 2008, it was 1% in a month. Now it's 20%, and it will go on. We have had increasingly vast numbers of people, tens of thousands already, who have died not of COVID-19, but of the result of the lockdown and not having treatment or diagnosis in this period, because the hospitals shut everything down apart from COVID-19, which has never been isolated to show it even bloody exists. I'll tell you where I'm going with this. At the same time, this is being justified to create a track and trace 24/7 surveillance system, and it's being used to vaccinate the world eventually, right? This is my question. This is my question to the protesters, right? I'm saying you haven't got a reason to protest, but just let's put it in perspective while you're pulling that statue down. Where is the frickin' outrage of that? What about the impact of that on black communities? They are being economically destroyed. And you're pulling a frickin' statue down? Where's your outrage? Where were you when this was happening? You were sitting on your ass in your house, acquiescing to what the very people you now protest about were telling you to do. And when real fascism was going on a global scale, you were bloody silent. It's about seeing where the real fascism is. Black, white, every nature of humanity is going to suffer the catastrophic consequences of this mendacity. Where was the outrage? Apart from a few, comparatively, nowhere. And let's just ask this question. If this If this virus just went away now, and at some point in the next few months, maybe into the new year, they come out with a vaccine, which has been the punchline of all this, as well as other things. And they say, oh, we've got a vaccine now. We've got a vaccine now. Everyone's got to be vaccinated. If nothing happened between now and then, how many people are going to have the vaccine? Oh, I'm not having a bloody vaccine. It's all gone away. That tells you something. It tells you something very clear. I've been hearing about this, the second wave, is there going to be a second wave? Well, of course there's going to be a second wave. When we go into the autumn, fall, and into the winter, what starts happening? Snotty noses, coughs, flu, pneumonia, respiratory problems. Can you imagine the hysteria that will take place as all those things are designated COVID-19 and the second wave has come? And what are they going to do then? They're going to go back into the lockdown. Because in the run-up to the vaccine, they want it to be mandatory because of what's going to be in it. We've talked about that in previous interviews. And so they want the fear factor of what's happening. Oh, COVID-19, COVID-19. No, you're redesignating the diagnosis. That's what you're doing. Of other causes. So easy. Why does this virus affect old people almost exclusively? Because they have all the other forms of death that can be redesignated COVID-19. Young people don't, overwhelmingly. So it's not affecting them. Well, it's not affecting them. And it's not affecting them because there is no frickin' virus, I would strongly suggest. But they have the other causes of death which can be redesignated COVID-19. They don't. That's why they appear to be massively affected, overwhelmingly affected. And by the way, in terms of not existing, just very quickly, I mentioned a little while ago that the latest Centers for Disease Control estimate is that the infection to death rate is 0.26%. Okay. We've now seen over months from doctors, other medical staff, etc., loved ones, families, the monumental level of fake death certificates where COVID-19 is on, which had nothing to do with the cause of death. Okay? Now, let's take that from the 0.26% death rate. What's left? Zero, I suggest, is left. But so if they're going to have this vaccine, part of it is to frighten people into having it because of everything's COVID-19. And the other thing is get them into lockdown, and those that won't have it, you say to them, you can't come out of lockdown until you do. And so you can see that another lockdown and another wave is not only coming, but it's absolutely essential to selling the vaccine. One other thing too, in this book, The Answer, should be out in a few weeks, I say that we're going to be given a series of shocks and upheavals, challenges of various kinds, often not on the face of it connected to COVID-19. It was only at the printers when all the race stuff started, the race division started. But another part of this shock, chaos, is going to be a food crisis. You know, if you can control the basics of life, and food is one of them, then you can dictate what people must do if they want the basics of life. That's what they want to control that. And they're all already in the process of manipulating a food shortage. We'll see this unfold at some point. It will be another form of control. And so what I'm saying is this is being ramped up and ramped up and ramped up and ramped up. In our first interview, you said to me, when does all this stuff end, in terms of what was leading towards the lockdown? And I said, it will end when the cult believes it has irreversibly transformed human society, so it will never go back. But even that description of end, what I said was, at some point they will roll back the extremes of the lockdown, but only to a certain extent. Because they have this agenda for what they want the world to be. And the pandemic hoax has given them everything they wanted, basically. Now, what they're not going to do is concede that back. They want to move on and ratchet up and take even more human freedom as this unfolds. And so we are going to face more and more extreme impositions the longer we keep acquiescing and giving our power away and accepting, yes, we don't like it, but we'll do it. All they're going to do is ramp it up and ramp it up and ramp it up. And so they've rolled it back a little bit, but what's still in place? Social distancing, the masks, the pushing people apart. And there's something else that's part of this whole psychological war on the human psyche. Look at what they've targeted most and for longest. Anything that releases the psyche in terms of chilling out, in terms of relaxation, in terms of human discourse, in terms of situations where you can let off steam. So they've targeted the pubs, they've targeted the restaurants, they've targeted sport, they've targeted all these areas. And what they're saying under social distancing is, oh, at some point we'll open the pubs and beer again. But you look at the videos of the pubs preparing for this. It's not the same experience. It's all social distancing. It's all apart. That's not the same experience. They've now got. They've now brought the football back, and what they're doing is destroying the very foundation and fabric of human society as we have known it. And football, soccer as they call it in America, is part of that fabric, especially what they call the working class fabric, but more than that these days. And it's a way of letting off steam. It's a way of release. It's a way of letting the cares of the world go while you're supporting your team. So what we now have is professional football clubs in the lower leagues in Britain, supported by a lot of people, but not in individually big numbers, that are on the verge of disappearing because they don't get the television money. They get their survival money, overwhelmingly, by people through the gate. Social distancing has stopped people going through the gate. Indeed, the season's just been finished. But the Premiership teams that have the big money from television, they're about to just finish the season, I think, in the next few weeks, behind closed doors, as they are in Germany and other countries. They're playing in front of nobody because of social distancing. Now, the new season is supposed to start in mid-August. How long into the winter before there's enough COVID-19 designated other causes? Do you think that the authorities that we've seen at work in the last few months are going to say, yes, we're going to have thousands of people in football stadiums standing next to each other?
No.
So what happens to football? a very foundation of the fabric. I mean, lots of the smaller clubs will go out of business. Football, as we know it, will be devastated by this. But and the key is its effect on the psychology, like the pubs and the bars and the restaurants and all the chilling out, all the interaction, all the relaxation. It's all being targeted.
It's all being done digitally now.
So people have no release. Why does anyone think suicide's going through the roof since this lockdown started? And it's a war on the human psyche. And the only way that you can see through it is to stop looking at the world like that and take a step back and see what the effects are of what's happening and who benefits from those effects. They're seeking to drive humanity crazy. And you know, when you're in a state of trauma, I did years and years research into mind control. From the mid-90s to well into the 2000s, both sides of the Atlantic, I did a tremendous amount of research into mind control. I talked to a stream of people who've been in mind control projects and put under mind control. And what I saw individually in things like MK Ultra, the famous government military mind control project in America, which came to light in the 70s publicly, only part of it did though. What I saw in the mind control techniques on individuals, I'm seeing collectively on humanity now. Same thing. Just a very quick one. One of the things one of the forms of mind control, it's called trauma-based mind control. What you do is you traumatize people. They want to take kids, ideally before the age of 6, and they put them through horrific trauma. They establish what makes the child ladies and gentlemen, what I'm just about to say, this is the mentality that was behind the lockdown and is behind what was happening now, the cult. They find out and establish what terrifies the child, and then they subject the child to it. They'll subject the child to watching an animal be sacrificed. They might, in the extreme cases, make the child watch a human be sacrificed. And what happens is that there's a mechanism in the mind which shuts away, basically puts behind an amnesic barrier horrific memories, so the conscious mind is not constantly reliving them. And they call these isolated fragments of minds memories, alters, as in altered states. And I've mentioned it before. What they then do is they program these alters with different tasks, like Manchurian candidates, etc. And they have what they call a front alter, which is the personality that seems to be the person that people interact with. But in the background, in the subconscious, are these other alters, which are programmed with certain behavior traits. It might be an assassination, it could be lots of things, honey traps, anything. And they have a word, a phrase, some kind of code that's hypnotically put into the mind, that when the person hears it, or even sees it, it can be a symbol, the alter that relates to will become the front alter. And the front alter will go into the subconscious. Now this alter, which has a completely different perception of reality to the front alter, which seems to be the normal personality of the person, will then carry out its programmed task. And one of the massively common ways that this is used is for very famous people to have sex, and sometimes horrific sex, with girls and women under this mind control. Because what happens then is, after it's happened, they bring the front alter back and they put the alter that's experienced, like the sex abuse or whatever, into the subconscious mind. The front alter's back, it has not experienced the sexual attack or whatever the behavior is, therefore knows nothing about it. Where I'm going with this is the word they use to activate the alters and the switch is trigger. Someone's been triggered. Now you look at the woke psychology. What are they saying all the time? I've been triggered. They're putting things in educational documents and what have you, called trigger warnings, that something you might not like is coming up. Trigger warning. That I'm even seeing in the collective war on the human psyche the language of mind control that they've been using for decades and decades. And so one of the expressions, and very relevant to today, of this mind control, what they call trauma-based mind control, is that when someone's traumatized, in a state of anxiety, in a state of fear, they become massively suggestible. This is why they use trauma as part of the mind programming. So what they're doing to humanity as a whole is producing reasons to fear, reasons for trauma, reasons for anxiety. And when they've manipulated people into those states, they then put the mind control suggestions in there of that change perception.
This is happening to all of us right now.
Right now. So, for instance, if you get someone, and a lot of people watching this will have seen this in their own experience in the last few months, if you get someone so traumatized about a deadly virus, they become absolutely open to hypnotic suggestion, because this cult is not really targeting the conscious mind overwhelmingly. It's targeting the subconscious mind, which then filters through to become conscious perception. They put the suggestions in and change people's psyche. And this has worked to such an extreme that cancer doctors and other people in the specialists of heart disease and what have you. I mean, I remember a line from a British cancer specialist when he's saying how the lives of so many people are going to be significantly shortened because of the lack of treatment and diagnosis during the lockdown. He said people are more frightened of COVID-19 than they are of cancer. Now, this is what happens when you get people into a traumatized state and then you put the suggestions in. You completely, you basically hypnotize them. What's happened is that so many people in the last few months have been put under a hypnotic spell. And indeed, people are put through a hypnotic spell their entire lives. You go through the education system and then into the world of, where the media is telling you everything that you should believe and everything that's real and what have you. It's a hypnotic spell that's being cast on the human race. And when people talk about people waking up, what does that mean? It means they wake up from the trance. They wake up from the spell. And so I meet so many people because of what I do who say, I read your book, or I saw you do this, or whatever. And suddenly I just saw it. I just got it. And what do they say? I woke up. It's exactly what happens. When you can put out information that's putting a different angle on everything, what you're doing is breaking the spell. Because the spell is basically all that anyone's ever heard. Mainstream sources, they're all sources of the spell. And when people hear other sources of information and other ways of looking at the world, it breaks the spell. And people say, I woke up. Yeah, you woke up from the trance that you've basically been put in since the day you were born.
Is that what we're doing right now?
Yeah, well, I hope so. But what has happened in the last few weeks of this pandemic hoax has been the most potent, obvious, in-your-face example of a spell being cast on the human psyche, where billions of people put themselves under house arrest because someone, you are feeling sleepy, has told them to do so. No questioning, no research, no who benefits, just do it. And like I said earlier, the more people acquiesce to more and more ridiculous things, the more the spell gets deeper and deeper and deeper until eventually they don't even know how to think, never mind what to think. Why is it that so many people in the military, especially in the more, if you like, extreme elements of the military, why do they find it so hard to come back into human society? Because they've become so used to being told what to do that they don't know how to function when no one's telling them what to do anymore. And this is a phenomenon that we're seeing. But the great thing is that it's also had the effect of breaking the spell of vast numbers of people, because what's happened is so extreme and so obviously dramatically different to anything they've seen before, that it has had this effect of getting them to say, well, hold on a minute, what is going on? And that's the first stage of breaking the spell, asking the questions of, like, who benefits?
Yeah, but it's so powerful, David. I mean, I even caught myself over the past couple weeks saying, am I white privileged? No, I'm not. Of course I'm not. Maybe I am. No, I'm not. And so then I realized I had bought into their narrative. And I was like, wait a second. You know, now I've made a choice. Now I've identified this thing, and now I have to start questioning a narrative that has been dictated by someone else. I had to start thinking about all of my friends, and for the very first time, David, I started thinking, which of my friends are white and which ones are black? I never thought of that in my life before, but now I had to think, well, maybe should I call that person or not call that person? And then I was like, they got me. They got me into that agenda. You walk into the restaurant, what do you want? Red or white wine? Who said I wanted anything to drink? Who said I wanted your wine? This is the same thing we're seeing. Does Black Lives Matter or not? Well, which one is it? Because if it's a yes, you're one thing. If it's a no, that's that. And yet I'm buying into it. And I see what happened in London yesterday. And you've got, you know, Black Lives Matter protesting and the English Defence League protesting. And it just doesn't give me a lot of hope.
Well, there you go,
David.
There you go. What's that? Divide and rule.
I know.
Divide and rule. And you know, you've got the English Defence League, who are self-identifying with being British, English, whatever, and you've got the others that are coming from another direction, and they're, you know, giving it that, and yet you are a point of attention in the same consciousness that you are. You've just bought different perceptions. Why are you fighting each other? Because who benefits from you fighting each other? Those that want to divide and rule the target population. And you know, so many, you know, it's like there's nothing more manipulatable than genuineness that isn't streetwise. And I don't doubt that in many of the people, many of the people who are protesting and helping to create this division, that they genuinely feel that they're doing something that's right. But that genuineness is so easy to manipulate if it's not streetwise. You know, I mean, it's a simple thing. Look at who funds that which is driving your behavior and your perceptions. If it was being funded and driven and orchestrated by people of the communities it's supposed to serve, then you've got a certain perception of that organization. But if it's funded by the 1%, what I call the cult, which couldn't give a damn about black people or white people or any others but itself, as I said earlier, then streetwise, why are they doing it? And if I do this as this wants me to, am I actually serving the interests of this 1%? And then you don't do it, or you do it in a different way. And you know, I want a world in which everyone has opportunity. They have equal opportunity within the limitations of their situation. I mean, see, what this whole Marxism tyranny wants to sell is that everyone should be equal. But what does that mean? Everyone should be equal. I would like to play in goal for Manchester United. I'm 68 and I have an arthritic hand. Ain't gonna happen. So what I'm going to do is something that I can do. And I'm not going to complain that I'm limited, and I'm not going to say that I'm disabled and that it's the system that means I can't play for Manchester United. I look at the situation I'm in and I achieve or seek to achieve on the basis of who I am. I'm a unique individual, so I will achieve in a unique way. This idea that everyone must be the same, it's a race to the bottom. What we need is equality of opportunity, so that someone's race or background is not a block on their ability to achieve what they want to achieve, as long as they have the ability to do it. We all have different abilities and different gifts. But what we don't want, surely, is equality of outcome, because that's a race to the bottom. Give people opportunity, and then what they do with that opportunity is entirely up to them. They might say, no, I don't want to take that opportunity. I want to go walking in India. All right, fine. Well, you know, enjoy. But just because you go walking in India and this person achieves something with their opportunity doesn't mean that they're privileged. It means they just took the opportunity and direction of life that was different to yours. To create this equality of opportunity, it's to create a massively, fundamentally more fair economic system where wealth is shared out. Doesn't mean everyone gets the same, because you know you take motivation and incentive out of life. It's a race to the bottom. People go, I can't be bothered. Nothing ever gets happened, because well, no matter what I do, it's still the same. I'm gonna, So incentives are a very important thing. But what has happened in the system that we have is that it's been completely hijacked financially by a tiny few people. And I said earlier that freedom is actually choice. The more choices you can make, the freer you are. The fewer choices, the less free you are. And what dictates the choices in the system and the world that we have today? It's money, overwhelmingly. Not always, far from always, but it is central, money. So if you're the cult and you want to take people's freedom away, then you take their access to money away because you're taking their access to choice away. And they've done this, and this is fundamental, and I never hear any political party talk about this, or hardly, and certainly no major one. I don't hear the wokers talk about it. I don't hear any of them talk about it. This cult has achieved economic dominance on an ever more extreme scale, thus dominance of the choices and freedom of the population, by creating a situation in which they can lend money that doesn't exist, called credit, to the population, and then charge interest on it. And taking as collateral wealth that does exist, land, resources, homes, businesses, and if the population doesn't pay back the credit money that is a figment of the imagination, created out of nothing basically, then the people issuing the credit, i.e. the banking system owned by the cult, gets your wealth that does exist. And through the generations, this exchange of non-existent theoretical money called credit for real wealth and resources has sucked the wealth of the world into the hands of the few. And through that dominance of financial control, they dictate the choices, or lack of them, of the population. And they dictate the choices of black people, white people, Asian people, all different kinds of people and sexualities. That is the foundation of human control. And why are governments borrowing money from private banking systems and the population paying interest upon that borrowing? Why aren't the governments issuing their own currency interest-free and lending it to the population interest-free to go about their commerce and go about their lives, creating opportunities and choices that they wouldn't otherwise have? Why are we allowing a privately owned, in the end by a tiny few people, banking system to issue non-existent credit money and then be able to take the wealth of the people if they don't pay it back? And there's another thing on this. The same people that lend the money, the credit, dictate if the economy goes up or the economy goes down. Thus, they can lend lots of money and there's a boom. And then they can crash the economy and people can't pay back the wealth, the loans that they took out for no fault of their own, not because they're sitting on the side of the street saying, I'm not going to work. They want to work. The economy's knackered. So what happens then? Those that have lent the non-existent credit and crash the economy can then suck up all the wealth that was put as collateral for the non-existent money. Now, what we're going to see, Brian, in relation to what I've just said, is a frenzy of repossession of properties. A frenzy, as the cult, which owns the banking system, sucks up more of the wealth and resources of the world because of a pandemic hoax that crashed the world economy, which the ones that control the banking system were behind. Because the same people, the same cult behind Bill Gates and this whole virus hoax are the same people, the same cult that's behind the banking system. And if people want to focus on how we get our freedom back, then private banks lending money at interest, non-existent money called credit, has to end, or at least it has to be an add-on. We need a system, not a communistic system, but a system where governments are able to issue the currency interest-free. Because you say to people, where does money, how is money created? And they say, oh, the government does it. Well, almost entirely it doesn't. Money comes into circulation by private banks lending credit. And when they lend lots of credit, then there's the opportunity for lots of economic activity. And when they squeeze the credit, what did they say in 2008? A credit crunch. When they squeeze the credit, they're taking out of circulation units of exchange, and economic activity cannot take place, and so we go into a recession. And this cult, via the banking system and via this system, is constantly dictating when it goes up and when it goes down. This is how people like George Soros can make fricking fortunes. Because what their masters are making it go up and down, so they know when it's going up and down, and that an idiot could make vast amounts of money if you know when the economy and the stock market's going up and when it's going down. And this is how it works. And this fundamental change, stopping private banks controlling the entirety of the world economy, and thus in the entirety of people's lives virtually, is ignored, while pulling down a statue becomes the whole point of change. It ain't going to change anything. Changing the banking system, taking control of our economic lives, our livelihoods, our choice out of the hands of private banks, that would change everything on the level that we are talking about. But no one ever talks about it politically. Why? Because Britain is a one-party state. We have a one-party state Labour Party, a one-party state Conservative Party. In America, you have a one-party state Republican Party, a one-party state Democratic Party. And these one-party groupings, all these major political parties, are ultimately controlled by the same network that controls the banking system. And because of that, the politicians controlled by those people are not going to challenge the banking system controlled by those same people. And again, you know, I put a meme on the internet through this pandemic, and it was a picture of the earth, and it said, ruled by psychopaths, run by idiots. And whenever I've talked to politicians about how money's created, not one of them has been able to tell me. I've asked economists, some economists I've met over the years, how was money created? They didn't bloody know. They're economists. It's the private banking system issuing non-existent theoretical money called credit. That's the whole basis of it. And if I demanded that someone take from me money that doesn't exist, or I tried to give people money that didn't exist, telling them it was real, I'd get frickin' arrested. They'd say that's counterfeit money. But banks can make loans of credit which has never, does not, and will never exist except in theory. And they don't get arrested. They become the 1%. And that's how they've done it. That's how they've done it. That's how a few have accrued the wealth of the world. And so if Black Lives Matter, or anybody's lives matter, want to make a real difference to people's lives, They should be campaigning for the transformation of the world financial system and the end of private banks, ultimately controlled by the same people if you go deep enough, literally dictating the economic choices of closing in on 8 billion people.
So we've got these travesties happening in our banking system, in our education system, in our healthcare system, potential mandatory vaccination, and we're over here pulling down statues.
Yeah, it's a diversion. What does a magician want you to do when he's doing a trick? He wants you to look at the hand that's not doing the trick, so you don't see the hand that's doing it. And so, again, let's come back to this. You know, as this lockdown temporarily started to ease, and we started to see the data, we started to see no lockdown Japan with just a few hundred people designated COVID-19 deaths. I would question even that, but let's look at that. A handful, it's about 800 and something. And look where Japan is in relation to China, in relation to the West. Sweden has done no worse, in fact, are better than most of the lockdowns. It didn't lock down. The lockdown states, you compare them with the non-lockdown states in America, it's either no difference or the lockdown states did better, even by this ludicrous criteria that they're dealing with. In fact, nearly half of the designated COVID-19 deaths in America, nearly half are from 2 states. There's 50 frickin' states, 2 states, New Jersey and New York. So we're starting to get this data, and people are now starting to recognize the economic consequences. Now, this was a point where a response was possible of what the hell's gone on here? What's happened? How come this has happened on the basis of lies? So just in this period when that could have started, bang! Black Lives Matter. Protests, pulling down statues. The whole focus of attention has gone somewhere else. There are other reasons for that, but it's taken the focus away. When the real focus should be, look at the economic devastation of these lockdowns on every community, black, white, any. That should be the focus. That should be the focus of fury, it should be the focus of outrage, and it should be the focus of we're not having this. And it should be a focus on the people that did this to us. I've got to take the consequences. But they're not.
What about the people that want justice for the killing of George Floyd? What do you say to those people?
Well, what does that mean? They've charged the guy with murder, right? What about the justice for all the phenomenal numbers of black people in America, not least in Chicago, who've been murdered by black people? What about justice for them? Some black people have come out and said, all this black on black murder in Chicago, etc. Where's Black Lives Matter there then? Nowhere. Why? Because it's not the agenda. The agenda, they don't care about black people. Why is it more? Why is a life more important because it was killed by a white man than it's killed by a black man? It's still a black life. But black on black crime does not divide and rule because it's part of the same group. White on black crime is group on group in the manipulation, and thus you can divide that way, as they have. So, again, we come back to what I talked about earlier. We are all one consciousness having different experiences through different bodies and genetic types and races, as we call them. So, is a black life important? Yeah, of course. Just as important as anybody else's life, and vice versa. So why is it more important when a black life is snuffed out by a white person than it's snuffed out by a black person? Why is a white life more important if it's snuffed out by a black person than if it's snuffed out by a white person? It's a life, it's a body. And once you get caught into this, like I say, complete self-identity with the nature of your body, then you lose perspective of everything. We go back into tribalism. All life is sacred, in my view, and it doesn't matter who snuffs it out. It's just as appalling. And I remember seeing in the last few days a series of black people, quite famous black people, were being asked about all this. And they were saying some very, very intelligent things. And one was asked, what would you say to a black person? And he said, don't call yourself a black person. Don't see yourself as a black person. See yourself, in his terms, what he said, see yourself as an American. I say see yourself as the same consciousness as every other race, having different experiences. But, to acknowledge that you're in a black body or a white body is one thing. But to completely self-identify with that as who you are is to so diminish you. You're not a black person. You are an infinite expression of consciousness having an experience in a black body and within a black environment. But I'm a white person. And I am the same consciousness you are, having an experience in a white body. If we come from that level, and we see the labels as experiences and not the I, all these fault lines of division just disappear, because they are self-identification with a brief experience, thinking that's who you are, when it's just an experience. So, like I said earlier, I don't see myself as a white person. I see myself as consciousness having an experience in a white body. And I'd be happy to have an experience through any other body. It doesn't matter to me. It's just a vehicle for experience. Again, what is justice? I mean, the guy's been charged with murder. What more can be expected? Except the guy's charged with murder for committing a murder, in effect, in the way he's been charged. Now, if he hadn't been, and they'd have talked around it, and found an excuse, and they sometimes do, by the way, then that's a completely different situation. But what more can they do but charge the guy with murder who murdered? Now, what they're saying is that there's systematic racism. Now, in some areas there are, because there are racist policemen. I'm sure there are black racist policemen as well, because racism is not a race, it's a state of mind. It can manifest through any race. But again, if we go on perceiving everything down the fault lines of race, then all we're going to do is be in conflict with each other ongoing. Where's that going to take us? And like I say, if they hadn't charged him with murder and had talked around it, then you could absolutely understand the protest and the anger. But something else. I just think there's more to know about that incident. I'm not saying don't take it on face value or anything, but there's just something more to know about it, and I'll tell you why. I knew that the pandemic was a hoax when I saw that it was going to give the cult everything it wanted in terms of the control. I knew what it wanted, and this was going to give it everything. That immediately tells me this is something to look at here, because What this cult does not do is sit around a table strumming its fingers, waiting for something to naturally happen that it can exploit. It makes things happen, and because it's making them happen, what follows them happening is all sitting in place. That's why I said to you in the first interview, this vaccine for the virus will already have been there before they played the hoax to justify the vaccination. And they're talking about, oh, we're working for this vaccination, and now the vaccination, or what's going to be in it, it's already known, already exists. And it existed before they played the pandemic. And when I look at the way the protests, etc., played out across the world so fast and in such a coordinated way, it had 1% pre-preparation written all over it. I've seen it so many times over the decades, the way they do this. And of course, the vast majority of people taking part will genuinely be taking part because they felt it was right to do so, and good luck to them. They won't know that it's all orchestrated. It just happens and they become part of it. But it had a massive, the aftermath, the response had pre-planned coordination written all over it. And that's the way this cult works. And it's this technique that I dubbed a long time ago now, problem, reaction, solution. You create the problem, you get the reaction from the public on the basis of the way you've explained the problem, which is not actually what happened. And then you offer the solutions to the problems you have created. And look at the pandemic. You've got a problem, actually, a no problem in this case. And you have the reaction of fear, etc., and then you offer the solution, which is transforming human society as you plan to do all along. So, when these things happen, horrible things like the George Floyd situation, if we're going to be streetwise, we also have to ask ourselves, well, this happened just at the right time that they wanted it, to get exactly the reaction that they wanted. So maybe there's more to know about this, and it's not just only what you see. And I think there is more to come out about all that. I really do.
Yeah. So I'm looking forward to the next 6 months, and you're telling me we've got potential food shortages, second wave of the virus, more bankruptcies, harder economic times, and then a vaccine they're probably going to force down our throats and into our arms, and more fear in our children, our older people, and all of us. David, you got to leave me with some hope here, because that all looks dangerous, scary.
Well, yeah. But I have been warning about it for the best part of 30 years, and I spent a long time being laughed at and ridiculed for it. But I've kept going, because you can't walk away from this once you realize what's going on. And B, I have been optimistic. And the reason I've been optimistic is that just the numbers game, the number of people that are driving this is tiny. I mean, it's ridiculous. At its core, you'd get it in a room. And there's nearly 8 billion people. And I have been going on and on about this year after year after year, because, people say, what are we going to do? Well, you can look for a solution, and, where do solutions usually lead? They lead to more problems that need more solutions. You see it all the time. What's the best way to remove a problem? To remove the frickin' cause of it. You take away the cause of a problem, don't find a solution to it, take away the cause, and the problem must cease to exist because its cause has been deleted. And I've talked about the cause at length today. It's human acquiescence to authority. And authority takes many forms. It's government, it's the cult beyond the government, it's administrators, it's security guards, but it's also the hierarchy of Black Lives Matter. It's also the hierarchy that's emerging already in this Chaz autonomous zone in Seattle has been taken over and the police removed. Authority. Authority that tells you what to believe and what to do and wants to give you consequences for not believing it and doing it. You acquiesce to that and you're giving your freedom away. Acquiesce to that collectively, humanity gives its freedom away to a tiny few people. So, if what authority says is justified by the facts and by its impact upon humanity, i.e. it's not taking freedoms away, it's seeking to enhance freedom, then okay, I'll go with that. Yeah, makes sense. Why? Because I, in my uniqueness, have decided that that makes sense to me, therefore I will do it, because I agree with you. You tell me what I'm going to do that's going to take my freedom away for no other reason than you're telling me to do it. Well, you can stick that up your arse, mate. I ain't doing it. And if people just did that on a large scale, then authority would have to serve the people and not the people serve authority, because the people will not acquiesce to being dictated to in ways that enslave it. Therefore, you stop enslaving me, authority, or seeking to, and you start serving our interests of freedom and prosperity, and I will then make a deal with you. I'll accept what you say. But if you're trying to take my freedom away, and you're trying to dictate to me, you're trying to tell me to wear a mask, when it's obviously a load of old crap and just about psychology and not about protection, well, you can stick that mask where the sun don't shine. You won't get a virus there then. And the people take the power back. And they say, you serve us. We're no longer serving you. And they will not be able to function in that environment unless they serve the interests of the population, because unless they do, the population ain't having it. The few control the many because the population frickin' have it. Now, if we need a wake-up call on what happens when you give your power away to authority, then in the last few months you couldn't have had a more potent and blatant one. And come on, we're bigger than this. We're infinite expressions of consciousness. What are we doing letting a handful of people dictate our lives down to the fine detail? What are we doing policing each other? Saying that because you're making choices I don't agree with, I'm going to try to stop you making those choices, which is what the woke mentality is all about. You know, I've used this analogy before. People laugh at sheep because they follow the one in front and they follow the shepherd. Humans have out-sheeped the sheep. We've dispensed with a frickin' sheepdog. We keep each other in line. We don't need a sheepdog. Look at what's happened during the lockdown. It's classic cases of it. Is that the police? They've been out in their garden twice today. What? This is how the few control the many. And it's in our hands, in our perceptions, to stop it happening. Okay. Give us some optimism. Okay. When we stop doing that, game over. The question is, are enough people going to make that choice for the game to be over? Because the choice is there to be made. And that choice that he's made, and it's in the next few weeks and months, the choice that he's made there will decide if humanity heads into the darkest of fascist, tyrannical, technocratic nightmare, or whether at last, we take back the freedom that's been sitting there waiting, generation after generation, era after era. Look at the whole entirety of human history. What is it a story of? It's a story of the masses giving their power away to a few people. What does that mean? A few people have run the world right their way through history. We have an opportunity now to stop that. Will we make that choice? The consequences of the choice we make are going to be monumental in the different world they'll create. And we need to make those choices now.
Last time you were here, you talked about fear and love, and how fear is ultimately the reason we don't make those choices. Fear of getting arrested, losing our business, dying from COVID-19. I mean, that's what's been weaponized against us. How can people confront their own fears? Because that's what's stopping people a lot of times from saying no to this, sometimes ridiculous things that have been almost exposed in the last few months.
Yeah, but what is it a fear of? You know what I think it comes down to in the end? I think it's fear of death. I think that comes from everything. This is why this cult has worked, not least through mainstream science, to give us the impression that death is the end. It's lights out. There is no continuation. And the alternative we've been given to that is that at death we're going to be judged by some judgmental frickin' God. We're going to sit on his left hand or right hand or whatever bloody hand it is, or we're going to be stoking the fires of hell, right? So what death has become is a massive reason to fear. And the fear of death is an expression of fear of the unknown. And fear of the unknown is massive fear that people have. People limit themselves because they fear the unknown. That's why so many people want next week to be like this week, because it's their sense of security that nothing changes. So, again, letting go of the fear of death is all part of this reevaluation of self-identity. See, I don't fear any of these people. I don't fear, I mean, people say, oh yeah, well, what do they think they'll do to you? I don't fear them. I don't fear them. I don't fear the consequences of challenging them. Why? Because I self-identify as being an expression of infinite awareness, an eternal, indestructible, unique expression of infinite awareness. And at some point, I'm going to leave this body, and I'm going to explore forever, as I have done since in all my eternity, like everyone else. So there's no consequence relating to death that will limit me in what I do. And I can tell you from a personal point of view, that's an extraordinary freedom. Because from that, everything else comes. I'm an infinite expression of consciousness, having an endless, eternal series of experiences. So whatever experience I'm having now, someone ridiculing me or someone doing whatever, someone banning me from Facebook, ooh, in the great eternity of things, I don't think that's very important, do you? No. There'll be another experience along in a minute. It's just a experience I'm having in the moment. There'll be another one coming. And so you don't become enslaved by fear of consequences. Because a consequence is just another experience, which will lead to another one, and another one, and another one. And because I self-identify with being consciousness and not the human experience I'm having, which is just the human experience, consequences just are not the same as if when you're identifying totally with the body and your human self, if you like, with all its sense of limitation and fears and what have you, you basically step back from it. And so what you do is you do what you believe to be right. And you don't let, well, if I do what I believe to be right, what's the consequences? That doesn't add to the equation. And what's been my experience, that if you stop fearing the consequences and just do what you believe to be right, the consequences you feared don't happen. Right? They don't happen. It's this, a whole foundation of it is fear of death, which comes from not self-identifying with being an eternal flow of consciousness, which means death is just a release from the body. It's not the end, it's just the start of another experience. You just look at the life of the human world in a completely different way. So I'll challenge these people in every way I believe is effective, and I'll never worry about what they're going to do or whatever. And in the same way, I'm not limited by fear of what other people think. I mean, you know, at some other point in the great flow of experiencing forever, am I going to be going, oh God, it was terrible what names they called me when I was in that body called David Icke? Just an experience. And so when you lose the fear of what other people think, because what you say is they have a right to think what they like, but so do I, then you're not limited by, if I say this, if I do this, what will people say? What will they say on social media? I don't give a shit. And it's an incredible freedom. And it frees you to speak your truth, whatever your truth is. See, I've said things over the years and written things that appear to be incredibly far out at the time. And I was laughed at and I was ridiculed. All right. I'll write something else now. And now, so many of them are turning out to be actually, he were a bit closer to the truth than we thought, wasn't he? But if I'd have feared what other people thought and therefore censored myself, not said it, well, that's a bit far out, what will people say? Then people wouldn't be saying now, well, you know, he said that and it's happening. So, in so many ways, the greatest fears that people have are fear of death and fear of what other people think. And I can tell you, stick with it, because they'll think something else tomorrow. And if you are censoring yourself by what you fear they will think today, they won't be thinking something else about you tomorrow, because you wouldn't have said here what is shown to be credible there. Speak your truth. If people around you cannot respect your right to speak your truth, then what are they doing around you? Go and find another circle of people who will respect your right to be you. Don't try to persuade people and win them round when they just don't want to know. Just go and find some people that you can talk to that will respect you. Because what are you doing with people who don't have the respect for your right to your unique opinion? What are you doing with them? Go and find some other people. There's lots now, especially now. I mean, when I started out, there was very few, but now there's vast numbers of people that you can interact with that get where you're coming from, because they're coming from the same direction. Go and find them. You know, don't let people tell you what to say. Don't let people tell you what to think. Don't let people tell you what to do. You decide if you think that's valid, and if you think it is, then say it, do it, write it. But don't do it just because someone else tells you. That's how we got into this mess. It ain't the way we're going to get out of it.
And what about people that struggle with that fear of death and fear of what other people think? They're listening to you right now and everything you say makes sense. but they know that it's held them back from maybe talking about things today with their friends, from the decisions they make, from not wearing the mask, or not breaking social distance, or taking the vaccine because they fear X, Y, Z. How can they stop living in fear?
They can make the choice to do it. I'll tell you something else. When I was a goalkeeper, the worst part of being a goalkeeper was sitting in the dressing room before going out to play, because all that could go wrong was going through your mind. You went out there and did it most of the time. It works fine. And all those things that were going through your head in the dressing room, it never happened. I could tell you in my life experience of the last 30 years, if you speak your truth and stick with it, amazing things happen, and your life can be transformed by that. But one thing's for sure: if you don't speak your truth, nothing's going to change. You know, how many people have now been intimidated into silence and acquiescence by the very people from their own community who are dictating what they should think and what they should not think in increasing extremes. How many people are not saying what they think because they fear the consequences of what others will say if they do? And what this can do is lead to a situation, it's like Orwell talked about, where 2 and 2 equals 4 becomes 2 and 2 equals 5. And you can accept that 2 and 2 equals 5 initially because you fear the consequences of saying it equals 4. And that's the situation we're in now, in the madness. 2 and 2 equals 4 has become 2 and 2 equals 5. And we're being pressured to parrot that 2 and 2 equals 5, and then to accept that 2 and 2 equals 5.
About everything, from race
about everything,
to
about
everything.
all of it.
Yeah.
Everywhere. We're being told, you must believe 2 and 2 equals 5. So what happens in this psychological change, and this is all part of this psychological war I'm talking about, is that you start out and you think, I know 2 and 2 equals 4, but I'm going to get such shit if I say that. So I'm going to go along with it equals 5, and I'm going to speak and act as if I believe it, but I don't really believe it. It's a load of old bollocks. But eventually, the fusion takes place, and eventually you believe 2 and 2 equals 5. And one of the reasons you believe 2 and 2 equals 5 is self-respect. You don't want to face the fact that you've been intimidated into believing 2 and 2 equals 5, so you persuade yourself that it does. And that's the psychological shift that takes place that transforms the human psyche and the human perception. It's going on all around us now. I tell you, wokers, I tell you, Black Lives Matter, I tell you, 1%, 2 and 2 equals 4. And up yours if you tell me to believe anything else. If we stand steadfast on that, 2 and 2 will never equal 5. But if we don't, it will. And that is madness. And that's what they're doing. They're driving humanity crazy. But the power of our consciousness in its true power is far too powerful to fall for that. But if it's not in its power, it will fall for that. And lots of people are. But lots of people aren't, thank goodness.
So there's millions of people watching us right now that are shaking their head saying, I totally agree with David. And yet they think to themselves, I'm surrounded by people that don't. And every time I try to bring one of these topics up, they shut me down by, by character assassination or by some other thing. Oh, some other line that you don't care about, this or that. How do they have that conversation? Or do they just find a new peer group? Don't have it.
Don't have it.
Move on.
Let he who hath ears, let them hear. And those who are ready to hear another view of life will hear it. And if they're not ready, then go and find someone who is. Try to persuade people. You know, what's the point in talking to a concrete block, trying to persuade it not to be a concrete block? Until it decides, I'm not going to be a concrete block anymore, you ain't going to make any progress. So talk to other people. But in the end, you speak your truth. In any circumstances, in any environment. And if people don't like it, well, they can do the other thing. That's just as fine by me. But I have my truth, and I'm going to speak it. And I respect your right to speak it too. Your truth. But don't dictate to me what I'm going to say and what I'm not going to say. But you do waste a lot of time with people who are just not ready to open their minds to it. So fair enough, that's their right. Go and find someone that are. And there's vast numbers of people now, compared with when I started out, who are ready to hear it, and will give you support, and will give you respect for your view, and will be people that you can debate with and learn more from. They're all out there. But, you know, just because your family or your mates, you know, ridicule you or dismiss you or call you crazy, so what? You know, and your point is, go and talk to some people who won't be like that, you know. And so someone says something bad about you on social media. You know, has anybody died? Well, I mean, you know, people are starving, you know, people are suffering from terrible illnesses. Children are being abused. People have had their economic livelihoods devastated. And someone said something horrible to you on Facebook. Who gives a shit? Again, what does it matter? It only matters if you decide it matters. Someone else abuse at me. Oh, thanks for sharing that with me. Have a nice day. But, oh, how can you say that to me? Oh, no. The two reactions? Choice. Choice. You want to be emotionally affected and you know, undermined, hurt? Well, make that choice. You want to say, don't give a shit. Make that choice. And the emotional reaction will be very, very different. And the difference between the two is your choice. Who cares what some, you know, bloke in his bedroom says about you, be it an anonymous login name or whatever? What's it matter? Matter at all, unless you make it matter. I'm fortunate. I've had 30 years of abuse and ridicule, so you kind of get used to it. I do understand why, you know, people are facing it for the first time. It can be, you know, oh no, what are you saying this about me? But it doesn't matter what people think about you. It matters what you think about you. It doesn't matter what other people say about what you say. It's whether it's your truth or not. And you are unique. We may be expressions of the same consciousness, but we are unique expressions of the same consciousness. And we should celebrate our uniqueness and not be pounded into uniformity and blobs, which is what the woke mentality, which is a creation of the 1%, wants us to do. I won't have it. You want to call me anything you like? Call me it. Congratulations, round of applause. Have a nice day. Don't give a damn.
And I think speaking the truth is important, and then acting the truth. And that'll be interesting to see if people can act their own truth over the next 6 months, which means you might refuse to wear the mask. You might refuse to act like a victim in front of your friends. You might refuse to do the distance. You might refuse to accept, you know, economic peril. And that shows a lot of people as well as speaking the truth, but the way you act.
Oh yeah, it's like I said earlier, it's no good standing on the other side of the road observing and becoming more streetwise about what's going on. You've got to engage with it. But actually, it's not even engaging with it, it's disengaging with it. It's not cooperating with it when it's taking your freedom away, you know? And we've had so many in-your-face lessons in the last few weeks of what happens when you do that. We now have a choice to learn from it, surely. And if we don't, then this will go on and it will get more extreme. If we do, then the cult agenda will unravel, because we're holding it up. Did I ever tell you that story about Larry Grayson?
I don't think so.
Larry, you know Larry Grayson?
No.
You won't. You're from America. You don't know comedy. Larry Grayson was was a kind of a camp comedian, very funny man. I met him a few times. He was very funny, and a very down-to-earth bloke. I was invited to his memorial service when he died. It was in Covent Garden in London. And there was another comedian called Roy Hudd. He did a presentation of Larry's life. And it was very funny. I mean, there's so many laughs in this, because it would be for Larry. But he told this story, which Larry Grayson told him. He said that what Larry used to do, he, especially earlier in his career, he used to dress up as women, and do all that stuff. He would go on, the last vestiges of the old music hall theatre. And he said that one day he was in this all-male show, and the final scene was all the men came on dressed as sailors, and they formed a pyramid on the stage on each other's backs, while the band played Rule Britannia, Britannia rules the waves, and all that garbage. Then Larry Grayson came on, he said, and he was dressed as Britannia with the helmet and the sword and the shield, and he got manhandled up the pyramid to the top, right? So he's at the top for the big finish of Rule Britannia, end of the show. He said, he was quoting Larry telling this story. He said, but one of the sailors in the left-hand bottom corner of the pyramid got rather a cough. And the sailor, symbolic of, I've got no power, I'm at the bottom of the pyramid, I am, started to cough his guts up. And he couldn't hold in the pyramid any longer, and he stepped forward out of the pyramid. And what happened was the pyramid collapsed, and Larry Grayson ended up in the second row, he said. Now, Larry Grayson, symbolically, in that story, is the elite at the top of the pyramid. But it's only up there because we prats are holding it up there with our acquiescence to it and our fear of it. When we get a frickin' cough and step out and say, we're not having this anymore, I'm not holding this together anymore, I'm not acquiescing to this crap anymore, then the pyramid collapses. And that's why I'm so optimistic, despite of current events, that when the penny drops, that the elite are up there because we're holding them up there, then we can see where the real power lies. And that's why this cult works so hard to keep this truth from us, to keep this dynamic from us, that the real power is us. And they are dependent on us giving them that power. Because when we suss it and say, cough, cough, I'm out of here, they are going to end up in the second row. We have the power. If we'd only realize it, and they spend 24/7 telling us we don't have it, because they're terrified of us realizing that we do.
Well, everything you said now has happened to us over the past 3 months. We've been speaking our truth, and everything I feared, my worst fears happened, David, and nothing bad happened, I told people for years that my entire business was based on YouTube and my relationship with them, which is literally, a moment's notice from disappearing, and yet we found a way through. We found a way to keep putting out these messages, and we found all of these allies along the way. And I found all of these people that say horrible things on social media about us, but we've realized that it's actually not so scary. And I feel great about my truth. And it makes me wonder about what are the things that stopped me in the past that I was living in fear of. And there's just no reason to be scared of these things.
There's no reason to be scared. The perception of the consequences are what frees people into inaction. When you actually go for it, there's always a way. We are infinite awareness living within an infinite field of all possibility. There's always a way. And in every cloud, there's always a silver lining. You know, right at the start of this chat, I talked about davidicke.com, iconic.com, the BitChute channel, the featured documentary, length documentaries that we're about to launch, and another one we're about to start filming, and the new book, The Answer, in a few weeks. All these, outside of the apparent gods of communication, YouTube and Facebook, you know, they've gone. I haven't given it a second thought. Okay, they've gone, fair enough. Facilitators of fascism, no longer dictating my life. Thank you. So how do we react to this? And you do, because possibilities are always there. It's fear that freezes people into inaction. Go for it. Listen, I tell you what happened to me. When I had my awakening, my massive explosive awakening in the very early 1990s, and I was ridiculed and massive. I mean, you know, historic levels of ridicule I went through then. But I decided, because I realized that we were consciousness, I thought, what's the worst thing that I can do in the situation I'm in? It's completely knacker, bugger up, whatever. One brief life experience called human. That's the worst that can happen. So I'm going for it. And if you'd have said to someone in 1991, 92, 93, 94, 95, that this guy would be doing what I'm doing now, with enormous numbers of people actually looking at it with interest, they'd have laughed at you. What, Ike? He's finished, man. Done. Boom, boom, boom. Keep going. Keep going. Keep going. And if what you're saying has validity, it will be shown to be so. If you speak your truth, and the rest will take care of itself. It really will. The one thing that is for sure is if you don't speak your truth, then the official narrative will go on being unchallenged and will go on in the direction we've been in. Time to speak your truth. What's the worst that can happen? What's the worst that can happen? You know? And I have this thing I say, the deathbed perception, where you're lying on your deathbed, you've got 10 minutes to live. Now tell me what was important. Does it matter that someone put something horrible about you on Facebook? No. Does it matter that people laughed at you, ridiculed you? Does it matter this, that? No. None of those things matter at that point. Okay, well, I've got some good news for you. You haven't got 10 minutes to live. I was kidding you. Now get off your arse and live your life as if you've got 10 minutes to live. And see what really matters. And when you do, you find very little does that you think does. You know, all the ridicule and abuse thrown at me, it's had no effect. Because it would only have an effect if I decided to allow it, and I don't. You know, so we are in control of our lives if only we realized it. The way we're controlled is to be persuaded we're not. So simple as that.
Simple as that. David, I want to thank you for the crazy adventure of the last 3 months. You've shown me things I never thought were possible. I never thought we would find, 32,000 people around the world that wanted us to do this off platform. I never thought we would have, gotten 1.3 million people watching us at the same time. We couldn't even done that on one of the fascist networks.
No.
I never thought that we would create so much awareness of your ideas, to where like bus drivers stop me and everybody stops me and says thank you and asks me questions about the things you talk about. So thanks for that. And again, this is the 7th time we sat down, and I didn't even know why I had you the first time. A lot of what you said didn't make sense to me, but I knew I should just listen to you. And every year that goes by, more and more of what you say makes sense. And so just thank you. Thank you for putting those ideas out there and speaking your truth when it was unpopular. I just appreciate that.
It's a pleasure, and I hope that I have shown, with my own experience, that you can speak your truth, and not just survive but prosper, and anyone can do it. I'm not sitting cross-legged on a mountain. I'm the guru. I'm the guru. Just listen to me. Anyone can do it. It's a choice. If I'm an expression of the same consciousness that everyone else is, then that consciousness can all do it. It's just a matter of making the choice to do it, and your life will change.
Yeah. And I think speaking your truth is something that we should just protect in such a big way. And I've had so many people on this platform in between our last conversations that have spoke about lack of censorship, First Amendment rights, and everything from the fact that you don't even know what your opinion is until you hear an alternate opinion, and then you actually have to figure it out in your brain, as opposed to parroting whatever.
That's when you start having a conversation. Different parts of the brain have a conversation. I would just say this. Maybe people might remember that once someone's opinion or view of you is a priority in itself, your uniqueness has been conceded. Once your priority is how people see you, your uniqueness has been deleted, because you will mold your uniqueness to fit what you think other people want you to be. That's why your uniqueness has been deleted. Speak your truth, express your uniqueness, and let the world come to you instead of you going to the world. And it will. It bloody will.
Yeah, it bloody will. I'm going to leave on that note, David. I appreciate you very much. For everybody out there, keep speaking your truth. We are going to keep broadcasting the truth no matter what. I've never been more assured at what we're doing is the right thing to do, to get those messages out there. And everyone I meet in the streets, David says, we want the choice to listen to whoever we want so we can make the decisions as adults. We don't want to be coddled by other people. We don't want to be protected by our governments. So we're going to keep putting these ideas out there, and we want to build something that will always have those ideas out there. So again, thank you very much for being here.
There's some great things happening. Come on, people. We're bigger than this.
Yes, and we're better than this.
Oh my God, yes.
To everybody watching, please, last chance, share this via the link to the sidebar. Tell your friends and family to give us 15 minutes, or just go speak your truth and do your truth. Also, we're going to have this sliced up into 20 clips, video clips as well. You can download those and share on the social and get this word out here, even if we have to go against these platforms or co-opt them or whatever we have to do. But spread the word. Again, I appreciate everybody who's made Freedom Platform a possibility. If you want to be a part of it, go to freedomplatform.tv/give. We're going to keep doing these broadcasts that would normally be censored on other platforms. And David, I look forward to seeing you back here to talk about your next book that I think is coming out in August.
The Answer, yeah.
The Answer. I'm super excited about that. I've been excited about this book. You've been talking about it for 6 months. And I'm really excited about this book. And thank you for the last 90 days.
Pleasure, mate.